Alright, so this one we're talking about approaches to pollution management. Alright, so pollution management is in fact a necessary thing. You should be taking recycling seriously and actually following proper procedures with everything. When you're out somewhere, whether it's on the beach or in the woods taking a hike or just down the street, if you're seeing trash, you should try to pick it up and put it where it needs to go. And these pictures are kind of examples of why they get wrapped up in the trees or power lines and can cause some damage. They're all up on the beaches. Animals get tangled up in stuff. It can kill them. And they're swallowing all that because it gets in their guts and makes a block. And obviously having themselves all bound up in fishing line or something is not good. Or even in the plastic bag. You can see the bird there. This is why it needs to be taken seriously. Protect our wildlife. We are not the only ones that matter. So there's 3 ways that we can do that. Replace, regulate, and restore is one way. So your first step is to change your activity that generates the pollution in the first place. You can also minimize the amount of pollution released into the environment, and you can clean up the affected areas after it's released. People don't realize, the simplest thing is actually creating pollution. Anytime you just throw garbage on the ground, you're creating pollution. When people do those things in remembrance of somebody and they release all the balloons, that's horrible to do because eventually they just come down somewhere, and it's the same thing as all this plastic that was in these pictures. It's no different. So we have to kind of think about our activities a little bit more and try to make conscious choices to do better. So with the replace, this is our most proactive strategy because the pollutant is not created, or less of it is created in the first place. It allows us to take care of pollution before it becomes a larger issue. It is hard to accomplish because it's relying on other people to participate. So while people are complaining about the whole plastic bag ban, when you carry your bags with you, I keep mine in the car, it becomes your habit. It just takes a little while, but it becomes your habit. You grab your bags, you go inside, and then you can fill them up. Or I prefer to just have them put everything back in the cart, and then I pack it up when I get to the car, because then I'm not in the way of other people. And then we also need regulations. So this is our next proactive strategy because the pollutant is controlled at the place where it is released. So this is usually adopted by government agencies that regulate industries because monitoring is the easiest at the place of emission, but it can fail to fully address the problem because the pollution is still being produced. All right, and then next would be restore. So this is a reactive strategy. It's something that we do in reaction to something, trying to fix it. So it's very expensive, takes a long time to work, kind of associated with putting the genie back in the bottle thing because it may not be scientifically possible. Like, how would we return all of the radioactive waste released from the Chernobyl accident? So this strategy doesn't solve anything. As far as the problems are concerned, it's just picking up the pieces after something happened. Alright, so we have our process of pollution. Some human activity causing a pollutant gets released into the environment, and then over time we determine the long-term impact of that on the ecosystem. Some ways that we can change it is, first, at the source, changing our activities. Changing human activities through education, incentive programs, penalty programs. Try to get people to use different technologies, change their lifestyles, use recycling. From there, as far as where it's being released into the environment, regulations would come in to reduce the pollutant at the point of emission. So that's where we get standards and measurements, control systems. And for our long-term impact, that's where we're coming in reactive, trying to clean it all up and restore the ecosystem. And that's the part that takes a lot of time and money. So our human factors that affect pollution management first is cultural. Impoverished areas pollute less because they consume less. Subsistence farmers are polluting less because they have a more intimate relationship with the land. So you can look back to like some of the stuff we talked about in the last couple sets of notes for that. And then the political factors is if we have a weak regulation and lack of enforcement, it creates a problem. Or if there's strong corporate involvement, things are happening to benefit the corporation versus the ecosystem. And then economic impacts. Economically secure people are able to kind of worry about the clean environment. They don't have to worry about clean water, shelter, or food. So they can worry about the cleanliness of the environment. Other areas where they're more impoverished, they are worried about clean water and shelter and food. So the people living in poverty will recycle more just because it's necessary. And a lot of times it's just cheaper to continue doing the things that are causing the pollution as opposed to following through with the regulations and putting in new systems to reduce your pollution. So one of our examples is with DDT. There's a case study to spray or not to spray on DDT that you should read. So it is actually important. I want you to read it and follow whatever instructions I give you on Google Classroom. So it's posted. And read it and do whatever instructions I've put there. It's just with the DDT, this was something that was in powders and sprays to help deal with the bugs. And so it got sprayed over everything. And the insecticide was first used to control malaria in World War II, and then it got used in agriculture. In 1962, we started to notice and question if there were links between DDT and cancers in humans and the decline of bird populations. And then finally in 1972, it was banned. And it wasn't banned for public health use in parts of the world where malaria is an endemic. So there's areas that still had used it, but basically it's been banned. And they found the connection between it and from it flowing into the water, like our bald eagle population really declined because it made the shells on the birds' eggs, birds that were coming in contact with it, made the shells on their eggs really weak. So when the mothers would roost on their nests, they'd end up crushing the eggs because the shells weren't hard enough to withstand it anymore, because it leached all the calcium out of their bodies and the eggs. And so that's how we had a huge decline in our bald eagle population, and that's kind of what sparked the U.S. to do something about it, because it's our national bird and we were losing it. There's actually videos that you can find that shows like how they used to do this. They'd go through areas like World War II and spray over top of a whole area. They'd go down streets in towns and just with a big sprayer, like going down the street, spraying it over children and everything. And then they found out later like how bad it was for you, and it's like ridiculous. Like if you see these videos, maybe I'll try to find a couple and post them so you can look at them. So like it had the pros in that it killed the mosquitoes, which were spreading the malaria, so the malaria rate went down. It also was really cheap and it lasted a long time. It was very effective. However, on the contrary to that, the mosquitoes were able to develop a resistance to DDT, same way like bacteria can develop a resistance to antibiotics and whatever. And then it created a lot of health concerns for us and created a lot of loss of biodiversity as it was killing off a bunch of other creatures, not just the mosquitoes. So there's this thing they talk about in that article. It's the precautionary principle. This helps us choose actions when we don't know the risks with 100% certainty. So, it's kind of a matter of whether or not to take action based on whether or not it causes any severe harm. And this is what that kind of looks like. That was the last slide on here, I do believe. So again, if I go and check things out, we have some videos I can share from YouTube that show what happened with the DDT and how they used to spray them. See this? It's like horrible. How could you not think? Like, I don't know how they didn't think that there would be a problem and why they thought it was ever okay to do that. But now we know better, and that's why it's been banned.
In 1943, the first 6 pounds of DDT arrived in the United States. It was tested by various government agencies, and before the war was out, we were producing tons of it. Then after the war, the use of DDT expanded into agriculture, forestry, and commercial and residential. It was used in hospitals, it was used everywhere. The peak year for its use was 1959, when there were 80 million pounds of DDT applied in the United States. So, again, by the end of the 1950s, 1960s, DDT and a host of now other related insecticides that were chemically similar had come into really widespread use. In 1945, Rachel Carson learned that the Fish and Wildlife Service had been doing tests on DDT at the Patuxent Research Center in Maryland, which is very near where she lived in Silver Spring. And these tests indicated that DDT maybe wasn't as harmless to other forms of life as had initially been thought.
At his press conference on August 29, 1962, President Kennedy was asked,
"There appears to be growing concern among scientists as to the possibility of dangerous long-range side effects from the widespread use of DDT and other pesticides. Have you considered asking the Department of Agriculture or the Public Health Service to take a closer look at this?"
Yes, and I know that they already are. I think particularly, of course, Ms. Carson's book, but they are examining the matter.
The presidential commission that Kennedy ordered, as I mentioned earlier, essentially confirmed that Silent Spring was correct. It didn't really have any enforcement authority at that point, so not a lot changed at first. But Carson was asked to testify before the United States Senate.
biologist Rachel Carson, who also wrote The Sea Around Us, worked 4 years in the preparation of Silent Spring. What she wrote started a national quarrel.
Chemicals are the sinister and little recognized partners of radiation in changing the very nature of the world, the very nature of its life. These sprays, dusts, and aerosols are now applied almost universally to farms, gardens, forests, and homes. Can anyone believe it is possible to lay down such a barrage of poisons on the surface of the earth without making it unfit for all life? They should not be called insecticides, but biocides.
After her death from breast cancer in 1964, the the environmental movement continued to pick up steam with Silent Spring as kind of one of its main touchstones. The formation of the EPA in